Welcome to episode 2 of our twice weekly webcast, The Movement of Goods and People. We're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 o'clock Melbourne time. As I said at the first one, this isn't meant to be a document of truth or fact because the situation is moving far too quickly. The purpose of this webcast is to give you a feel of the sort of things that we're hearing, and when we know the truth or we know facts, we'll share them with you. But it's really to try to answer a lot of the questions that we're getting from members and others around how people can move across state borders, how we can get freight and people across our national border, and what qualifies as an essential service. So today we are going to talk about, once again, what counts as essential services, how business closures are decided, some issues around the state border closures. What we said on Tuesday has already been superseded, so we're going to give an update. This time it will be by Stephen Myatt, who is Head of South Australia. And we'll also hear from Dan Engles from Visa Solutions to talk about visas and what to do with staff in Australia whose visas are about to expire, but also what you need to do if you need to travel overseas or have technicians come in from overseas. We've tried to design this so a lot of domestic issues are up front, and so if you're not interested in the international issues, you can move on. AIG Group is a national industry association. We represent the interests of members across a range of industries. And all throughout the year, even without a crisis, we're talking to various government departments, we're on various task forces and committees advocating on behalf of members. So it's no different during this COVID-19 crisis. So these are an example of some of the task forces and working groups that we're involved in. So we're involved in the federal government's COVID-19 task force, which has the overall view. Roundtables and interactions with Minister Karen Andrews, Minister for Industry and Science, Minister Christian Porter, Minister for Industrial Relations, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Minister Littleproud, who's Minister for Agriculture. So you can see it's quite a wide range of interactions we're having, and we're always feeding in what we believe is the opinion and the interests of members. So that's our job, is to spend a lot of time working with ministers, their officers and the bureaucracy, but your job is to tell us what we should be saying if you don't agree with what we're telling them. The way to feed into that process is to email big@aigroup.com.au, and I think some of the issues that were raised or emailed on Tuesday we've already dealt with, and also follow us on Twitter at @the_AI Group, where a lot of other information is being pushed out. This is a question that keeps coming up all the time. What is an essential service? There is a fear that the economy will shut down and you simply won't be able to operate. So there's a lot of interest in trying to be considered an essential service. We have that interest as well. So it's important to remember that there aren't really set rules on this. Every government around the world is just making it up as they go along. And what we can know, though, Australia's a little bit behind than other countries in terms of what's going on. So, sorry. So we don't have hard and fast rules, but we can look around the world to see what's happened. If we look at what happened in Italy and New Zealand now that is completely closed down, it's not individual company based, it's industry based. So a whole sector of industry will be listed as able to open. For those companies who can operate, all their staff can operate from home, they can still continue to operate. It doesn't ban you from operating, it really just gives you a reason for your staff to be on the street. And what's happened in Europe is that as people are leaving their homes and walking the streets, the police are stopping them and asking why. Why are you on the street? You should be at home. So they've had to carry a letter from their employer which explains why they're on the street and why they've left their home. So the rule really applies to the right of an individual to leave their home. If you don't need your employee to leave their home, then you can keep operating. Every country and economy has a different idea of what's essential. So a lot of the European countries have included bike shops because a lot of their health workforce ride bikes. We don't think that's likely in Australia. So it is useful to look at what others have done, but it may not be the final answer. But the important thing to remember is that we all have a role in delaying any decision on closing the economy further. If companies, I know, are very anxious about this and wondering what they can do, trying to get onto lists, trying to talk to governments, the most important thing you can do is get your employees, get your customers, get your suppliers, get your family, everyone to follow the rules. Stay at home, don't gather in groups, don't go to weddings that are more than 5 people, all that sort of thing. If everyone stays home and follows the rules, we reduce the infection rate, then we won't actually need to close down the whole economy. So this is what we've said to the Prime Minister, and this letter is on our website. And I'm sorry for those on Tuesday who are getting a repeat. But essentially what we want is a clear definition of the range of industries. We don't want vague commentaries such as critical industries like health or critical industries such as food. What part of the food ecosystem would be considered essential? Is it just food production? Is it cold storage? Is it packaging? Is it pallets? Is it trucks? Is it the regulatory regime? Which part of the industry will be considered essential? We also want coordination of the approaches to be common across states and territories. So in terms of particular industries, we've put forward health services, pharmaceuticals, health equipment, clearly essential, energy generation, distribution and telecommunications, and food production and sanitation such as waste collection and disposal. But we also believe that it's really important for those industries that support the supply and distribution of essential goods and services to be able to operate. And these include a range of manufacturing, maintenance, construction businesses and their supply chain. And we don't know how long, should we ever get to this point where so many businesses need to close, we don't know how long it will be. So there needs to be an ability to adjust the definition as we move along and experience an emerging circumstances. Who can stay open in Australia? So in Australia at the moment, it's not so much what essential industries can stay open, but rather listing those industries where it's deemed that the risk of infection outweighs the risk, the economic risk of closing them. So there's been quite a lot of publicity on this since the Prime Minister announced it Tuesday night. So food and beverage services, takeaway and home delivery being excluded. Auction houses and a lot of real estate display homes. It's important to remember though that it's only property auctions that have been shut down. Livestock auctions are excluded because they're an important part of the food chain. However, the social distancing rules still need to apply, and it won't be the social event that it often is. A lot of personal services have been asked to shut down with some exceptions, famously for hairdressers. Entertainment, sport and fitness and accommodation services, there's some various rules by state and territory, and cultural institutions, libraries, museums, religious institutes and the like. So as I said, it's sometimes useful to look at what's going on around the world in similar economies to get an idea of where we fit and what our direction might be. But it's not a final answer. It's really a bit like having a bucket with a leaky roof. The bucket stops your floor getting wet, but it doesn't fix the roof. This will give you an idea, but it's not the answer. So very similar to Australia, they have kept open food and beverage services. They have closed, though, nearly all retail except for those listed. They've also closed personal services, but again, some exceptions for hairdressers, entertainment, sport and fitness, accommodation services. It's a bit complicated because not all hotels are the same and some have long-term residents. And they've also closed cultural institutions with exclusions for blood donation and food banks. They've also discouraged people from leaving their homes, and people should only leave their homes in the UK for 1 walk a day. The approach in the US is a bit deeper. They haven't just named industries, they've looked at the whole ecosystem. So this chart shows you what Department of Homeland Security in the US is recommending. The challenge for anyone operating in the US, or if you've got customers or suppliers in the US, is although this is a national document, what's happened is that each state has made their own rules and gone alone. So it would be challenging for a business in America to navigate. I might just go to Dan and ask Dan to step in, and then we'll cover state closures after that.
So, Louise, as you said, it's a very fluid situation, and in terms of immigration, there's been very few formal announcements. If you're an international student and you're involved with working for Coles, Woolworths, any of the major retail outlets, then if you're a shop stacker, then those concessions have been given in terms of lifting the 40 hours per fortnight limit for students. And outside of that, employers really just need to follow some broad guidelines depending on the status of the temporary visa holder. So, Louise, what I thought we'd just run through a couple of scenarios that employers may be facing. For example, an employer may have sponsored employees. Where you've got a sponsored employee, if they're on a subclass 482 or perhaps the old 457, then you've got a couple of situations and restrictions. The employer has sponsorship obligations in relation to that individual, and the individual has obligations that apply to their visa. And so one of the underlying rules is that we all need to still operate lawfully in this environment. It's a highly unusual circumstance, but to the maximum extent possible, we have to comply with the legal requirements. So, for example, a 482 sponsored worker is required to work in the occupation and is required to work full-time and be paid a certain amount. We are coming up with a number of situations where employers are asking about reduced hours and whether that individual can work half the time at half the pay. We can't advise employers to operate in breach of their obligations until the Department of Home Affairs comes out with some new regulations or an announcement about how employers should operate with that. But the best advice that we can give is that employers need to treat the sponsored individuals the same way that they would treat the Australian workers. So don't differentiate between the two. If you're having to reduce hours across your workforce in order for your business to survive, then that would obviously affect the temporary visa holders as well. You also, it's a good idea to keep the department informed about what you're doing. And every employer who's an approved sponsor will have the details on their sponsorship, which shows how they should communicate with the department. So, for example, if they're having to reduce hours, if they're having to reduce pay rates for sponsored individuals, it's a good idea to keep the department informed, and there'll be a notification at the bottom of your sponsorship which tells you how you should communicate with the department. So send an email, send something in writing to the department to advise them what's happening with your workforce and what's happening with your employees. The other end is with the sponsored individuals. They're in a more difficult situation because they have a requirement that they work for the sponsoring employer in the occupation. So to give you an example, if we're talking about hairdressing salons and the salon can only offer half the number of hours or half the income, then you've got a temporary sponsored individual who's onshore in Australia who at the moment does not get access to social security benefits. Obviously, they've got to pay their rent, they've got to be able to afford food, they've got to support themselves in Australia. And so they've got a problem in terms of the restriction. They may not be able to find alternative work. So once again, the advice to those individuals is to keep the department informed. Okay, if they keep the department informed about what they're doing and what's occurred, and that they can no longer work for a particular employer, and they can request access and they can request variations to their visa conditions, then that's the best thing to do. So in terms of sponsored individuals, employers who are the sponsor, that's probably the best advice we can give at this stage until the Department of Home Affairs comes out with some clearer guidelines. Okay. Louise, there's some other situations as well. We've got the international students. We've already spoken a little bit about that in terms of if they are working for Coles or Woolies. We would expect there'll be some variations around that the department will come out with fairly soon. And that would be along the lines of perhaps easing the restrictions on what they're allowed to do and how many hours they're allowed to work. Similarly, with a lot of employers will have working holiday makers. That will either be a subclass 417 visa or a subclass 462 visa of some sort. They have similar restrictions in terms of you cannot work for an employer for more than 6 months. In this situation, I would be suggesting that a lot of people will be putting forward an application to the department to extend that where they are in work and the employer needs them for longer than the 6 month period. So I'd be making an application for that waiver as well. As a general rule, Louise, for anyone who is a temporary resident in Australia on some sort of temporary visa, and the latest estimates suggest there's probably something around 2 million people who are in Australia, who are onshore and are on some sort of temporary visa. It's very important that all those individuals do not allow themselves to become unlawful. So don't work in breach of your visa conditions as far as possible, but also do not, if you've got an expiring visa and you're unable to travel, then do not allow yourself to be unlawful. For Visa Solutions in our practice, we're helping AI group members. We're doing a lot of visitor visa extensions, which means they've got situations where visitors are here onshore, they can't travel, they need to remain onshore. Therefore, we're making an application to the department to extend the time they've got a visitor visa valid for. As soon as we put that application in, then that individual can rest assured that then we've got something in front of the department, and the department will get to it at some stage when resources allow. So anyone who's in that situation, if you are facing an expiring visa of any sort, then either approach the department directly or through your migration agent, and make sure that you make an application for some visa of some sort. And that way that will maintain your lawful status. Quite often, if you are in Australia on a temporary visa and you've made a further application, then you'll get access to what they call a bridging visa, which will take you from the time that your current visa expires through to whenever the department assesses and responds regarding your new visa application. So, just maintain your lawful status, because, Louise, we will get through this. It'll be 4 months or it'll be 6 months, but it'll be important that once we do and things start to recover, that everyone is able to maintain their lawful status. Does that make sort of
yeah? No, that is very helpful, Dan. And I think that's really the important message, is that all companies should be, as best they can, lodging advice to the department. It may not be read immediately because I'm sure they're getting a lot of advice, but lodging that advice at least shows that you're compliant, because you need to make them aware of any change of circumstances.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Now, and I know there's been some interest or questions from members on leaving the country. There's not many ways to get off this island at the moment. But the advice I received from Border Force was that should you find a plane that you can buy a ticket for, a letter from your employer explaining why you needed to travel under the current travel ban would be sufficient. They haven't really built the processes, protocol, so that may change, but at the moment I think that's sufficient. And there is a process, I understand, to apply for permission to bring people into the country, non-residents, non-permanent residents, non-citizens, for certain criteria. Have you had some experience with that, Dan?
Yes, that's correct, Louise. So there is a process or protocol that has been in existence for some time, and it has been updated by Border Force. You go and check their webpage, and this applies to exemptions to the travel ban for sponsored workers or other individuals to enter into Australia. And it relates back to what you were saying about essential services, and we're particularly talking about the mining, the resources sectors in Western Australia and in Queensland. My team have put through a number of applications to the department to allow essential crews from offshore who are on 482 visas. So their 482 visas have been granted. they're waiting offshore. They are required to come into Australia to relieve existing crews in the resources, mining, oil and gas sector. And there is a process that we are following to request the department to allow an exemption to allow them to get on the plane. We've put the applications forward. We have not heard from the department because the department's extremely busy, obviously. But once the department gets to dealing with these, it's very important that if a company, an employer, is facing that situation and they need an individual, either on a subclass 482 or a 400, to be urgently within Australia, and it meets the established guidelines of essential workers, then it's important that they've already put that application through to the department. If they do it the other way around and wait for the department to make an announcement and then they put through, they will be further down the queue. Okay, so we're being a bit proactive with this. There's an established protocol and there's established forms. You can find it yourself. It is available on the Department of Home Affairs website, but like many other government websites, there is a lot of information on there. And if you are having trouble finding it or getting through to it, then we can certainly assist. Or Louise, if you like, we can make that available to AI Group if you feel there's a reason to distribute it.
Thank you. Yes, it's on the Australian Border Force website, their COVID page, but we will share the link when we share the link for this webinar. Now, I don't think now that Steve has joined us, or has he? No. All right, so I will just talk quickly, we've only got 5 minutes left, about some of the state and territory border closures. So what the general theme on all these closures, border closures in WA, South Australia and Queensland and Northern Territory is essentially to reduce the movement of tourists across borders. So it's not designed to stop freight or legitimate business or border communities from, if they live on the border and going to work and home. This information is all on our website, comparing all the different states. It has now a process for those who want to apply for exemptions and who is entitled to an exemption. And there's some other exemptions, non-work exemptions, such as compassionate care responsibilities and family court orders. It's also important to note that some shire councils are also trying to reduce the number of tourists coming into their area. Up in the Daintree Forest, the Douglas Council, they announced that they are going to restrict use of the ferry and try to restrict the number of tourists coming into the area. They have said that they'll allow legitimate business travellers, construction, repair, technicians and the like to travel through. But if you are in one of these areas or you have staff who need to travel through some of these remote areas, it would be worth checking with local authorities if there are any travel restrictions. So we've just got a few more minutes unless there's any questions. But one last thing, a little update on the air freight, because I know that was a big issue coming out of Tuesday's session. I think the air freight availability has shrunk again since Tuesday, but what we've learned is that there are some companies who are banding together to charter their own freight planes. If that's something that's of interest to you and you're not already talking to people, you don't know how to get in with those networks, please email us at big@aigroup.com.au and we will connect you with the relevant people. So thank you once again for joining us. There'll be a poll coming up in just a moment, I hope, asking you what sort of topics you'd like us to cover for the next week. You can choose more than one, so you don't need to agonise over the choice, and we'll try and get the right sort of speakers for you. But with that, thank you very much, Dan. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you on Tuesday. and we'll see you on Thursday. Thank you for joining.